Approximately 66.04 million years ago, one of the most significant events in Earth's history unfolded. A massive asteroid estimated to be between 10 and 12 kilometers in diameter struck a shallow sea near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. For many people, the story ends there. An asteroid struck the planet and the dinosaurs died. But the reality was far more complex and far more tragic. The asteroid's impact lasted only moments, but its consequences would unfold over months, years, and even decades. But before we dive in, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future videos. Let us now see what happened in the hours immediately following the impact. In the first moments after the impact, the destruction was almost beyond comprehension. Near the impact site, entire ecosystems disappeared within minutes. The asteroid struck with such force that enormous volumes of rock were instantly vaporized, while countless tons of debris were blasted high above the atmosphere. The ground shook with a magnitude unlike anything experienced in human history, and seismic waves began racing outward through the Earth's crust. Within the first hour, the effects were spreading far beyond the coast of what is now Mexico. Powerful earthquakes rippled across vast regions. Along nearby shorelines, immense tsunami waves surged across the landscape, carrying water far inland. Forests, river systems, and coastal habitats that had existed for millions of years were suddenly transformed. But the impact itself was only the beginning. As debris launched into the sky began its return journey, the atmosphere became a source of danger in its own right. Countless fragments of molten material re-entered at tremendous speeds, heating the skies over large portions of the planet. To many animals, below the heavens may have appeared to glow with an eerie brightness. In some regions, wildfires ignited across enormous areas, adding smoke and ash to an already changing world. For creatures living near the center of the catastrophe, there was little chance of survival. Entire communities of plants and animals vanished before they could react. Landscapes were buried, burned, flooded, or swept away. The world they had known ended in a matter of hours. Yet the story was very different elsewhere. Thousands of kilometers from the impact site, many dinosaurs were still alive. A herd grazing on a distant floodplain would have had no understanding of what had happened beyond the horizon. A predator moving through a forest would have noticed nothing unusual at first. Rivers still flowed. Familiar pathways still crossed the landscape. Life, at least on the surface, appeared to continue. This contrast is one of the most remarkable parts of the story. While some regions experienced devastation on an unimaginable scale, vast portions of the planet were not destroyed immediately. For countless animals, the first day after the impact may have seemed confusing, but not necessarily fatal. They had survived the initial catastrophe. What they could not know was that a far greater challenge was already beginning. The asteroid had triggered a chain of events that would unfold over months and years, gradually transforming the entire planet. The greatest threat was no longer the impact itself, but the slow collapse of the environment that sustained life. And so as the first day came to an end, while the dinosaurs living near the Yucatan Peninsula had already vanished, millions of animals elsewhere across the planet were still alive. They continued to search for food, protect their young, and follow the routines that had guided their species for generations. For one final moment, the age of dinosaurs still endured. At first glance, the world still seemed recognizable. But the world around them was changing, and the consequences had only just begun. They believed they had survived the catastrophe, but they had no way of knowing that the greatest threat was no longer on the ground. It was above them. The sky itself was beginning to change. About a month after the impact, the consequences of the collision were being felt across the globe. Vast amounts of dust, ash, and sulfur-rich particles had been hurled high into the atmosphere. Driven by global winds, these immense clouds spread around the planet, reaching even the most distant regions of Earth. Unlike ordinary weather systems, these materials could remain suspended for long periods of time, gradually encircling the globe. As the weeks passed, less and less sunlight reached the Earth's surface. At first, the change was subtle. A slightly dimmer sunrise, a hazier horizon, shorter periods of bright daylight. But month after month, the effect became impossible to ignore. The sun, which had powered life on Earth for hundreds of millions of years, now appeared weak and distant behind a veil of atmospheric debris. Temperatures began to fall. Scientific models suggest that average global temperatures may have dropped by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius or more in some regions. What followed is often described as an impact winter, a period during which sunlight became severely reduced and ecosystems struggled to function. For the dinosaurs, this was an enemy unlike any they had faced before. A Tyrannosaurus could still defend its territory. It could still find prey during these early stages. A Triceratops could confront predators with its horns. A herd of Edmontosaurus could migrate in search of better feeding grounds. But none of these adaptations offered protection against a darkening sky. And with each passing week, the planet was becoming a little colder, a little darker, and a little less capable of supporting the life that had once flourished upon it. As sunlight continued to fade, the first truly devastating consequence began to emerge. The very foundation of nearly every land ecosystem, the plants themselves, were starting to die. Two to 6 months after the impact, the crisis entered a new phase. Its effects were now spreading to every corner of the planet. As dust and sulfur-rich particles continued to block sunlight, photosynthesis began to decline on a massive scale. Plants could no longer grow at normal rates. Many forests stopped regenerating. Across vast regions, leaves withered, new growth slowed, and entire ecosystems began to lose the energy source upon which they depended. This was the moment when the extinction ceased to be a geological event and became a biological one. Scientists believe global biological productivity dropped dramatically as the impact of winter continued. The green world that had supported dinosaurs for generations was beginning to fade. For large plant-eating dinosaurs, the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. Imagine a herd of titanosaurs, some of the last long-necked giants on Earth. For creatures of such immense size, survival depended on consuming enormous amounts of vegetation every day. Under normal conditions, the forests could sustain them. But these were no longer normal conditions. The plants they relied upon were growing more slowly, recovering less effectively, and becoming increasingly scarce. To find enough food, the herd would have needed to travel farther than before, expending precious energy in a world where energy was becoming harder to obtain. Elsewhere, other herbivorous dinosaurs were suffering through the same catastrophe. The foundations of the food web were weakening, and every animal that depended upon those foundations would eventually feel the consequences. However, the effects were especially difficult for the young. A fully grown herbivore might survive weeks of hardship. A juvenile had far less margin for error. As food became less abundant, young animals would have struggled to keep pace with migrating herds. Every additional mile required energy. Every missed feeding opportunity carried greater consequences than before. A forest that once supported hundreds of animal species had now withered away, leaving only a few behind. Dinosaur species that once lived and thrived there now faced increasingly difficult challenges to survive. This is perhaps one of the most overlooked aspects of the catastrophe. The crisis was not only affecting the present, it was erasing the future as well. Across vast regions of the world, the great herds that had once defined the landscape were becoming smaller. Migration routes grew quieter. Nesting grounds became less active. Species that had endured for millions of years were beginning to lose their ability to replace themselves. And as the numbers of giant herbivores declined, another group of animals soon faced a crisis of its own. The predators were about to discover that their world was changing as well. For millions of years, large carnivorous dinosaurs had depended on stable populations of herbivores. Now that foundation was collapsing. Only a few months after the impact, ecosystems that once supported thriving food webs were becoming increasingly fragmented. Predators such as Tyrannosaurus dakotaraptor and other large theropods still occupied the top of their environments, but their world was no longer the same. Their strength, intelligence, and hunting ability meant little in a landscape where prey was becoming scarce. A predator that once encountered large herbivores regularly might now go longer periods without a successful hunt. Territories had to expand, forcing individuals to travel farther and expend more energy simply searching. The land still looked familiar, but the abundance that had defined the late Cretaceous was quietly disappearing. For large carnivores, this was a particularly severe challenge. The bigger the animal, the greater its energy requirements, and the more vulnerable it became when food sources declined. Even a Tyrannosaurus, one of the most formidable predators ever to exist, could not overcome a world where there was simply not enough to eat. A Tyrannosaurus may have survived the asteroid impact, the earthquakes, the wildfires, and the global disruption that followed, but survival itself became meaningless without food. Scientists cannot identify the exact moment or individual that marked the end of non-avian dinosaurs. Fossil evidence suggests that most populations disappeared within a relatively short period after the event, likely within months to a few years, depending on local conditions. Some isolated groups may have persisted longer in regions where food resources lingered, but ultimately, every population reached the same outcome. There was a final footprint, a final movement through a fading landscape, and a final moment of recognition between members of the same world that had existed for over 160 million years. And then gradually, those populations vanished entirely. By the end of this process, all non-avian dinosaurs had disappeared. The age of dinosaurs was over. Yet even as these giants faded away, life itself had not ended. In smaller, less conspicuous forms, some survivors were already enduring the aftermath, carrying forward the continuity of life into a changed world. As the age of dinosaurs came to an end, life on Earth did not disappear completely, but it retreated into a few remaining refuges where conditions were still survivable. Among the most important of these were freshwater ecosystems. Rivers, lakes, and wetlands proved more resilient than many land-based environments, partly because they were less directly exposed to the full severity of atmospheric cooling and the collapse of terrestrial plant communities. In these environments, life continued in reduced but persistent forms, offering a fragile continuity in a world that had otherwise been transformed. Fish in freshwater systems continued to survive, feeding on whatever organic material remained available. Crocodilian lineages, already ancient even in the late Cretaceous, proved remarkably resilient, persisting through their slow metabolism and ability to endure long periods without food. Turtles, with their protective shells and adaptable diets, also survived the transition. Amphibians endured in damp, sheltered environments where moisture and food sources remained sufficient to support small populations. In the shadows of this collapse, small mammals also persisted. These were not large or dominant animals. Many were no bigger than modern rodents, weighing less than 100 grams in some cases. Yet their size, flexible diets, and low energy requirements gave them a critical advantage in a world where resources were sharply limited. They could survive on seeds, insects, carrion, and whatever organic matter remained in a struggling ecosystem. Even early birds, the only surviving lineage of dinosaurs, continued to exist in these harsh conditions. Their ability to fly, combined with small body size and varied feeding habits, allowed some species to endure where larger animals could not. These birds were not yet the diverse groups we see today, but they represented an unbroken thread linking the ancient world of dinosaurs to the modern era. For over 160 million years, Earth had been shaped by enormous creatures dominating vast ecosystems. Now, survival belonged to the smallest. In this new world, success was no longer defined by size, strength, or dominance, but by efficiency, adaptability, and restraint in energy use. They simply endured. They lived in the margins of collapsing ecosystems, but still present. And in doing so, they carried forward the continuity of life at a moment when so much had been lost. From these fragile beginnings, a new chapter of Earth's history would eventually emerge. The most severe phase of environmental collapse had passed. Dust and aerosols slowly settled from the atmosphere, allowing sunlight to return more consistently to the surface. With time, temperatures stabilized, and ecosystems that had been pushed to the edge of collapse began a gradual process of recovery. Plant life recovered across the planet. Ferns were among the first to recolonize disturbed landscapes, followed by flowering plants that would eventually come to dominate many ecosystems. As vegetation returned, it provided the foundation for rebuilding food webs from the ground up. Slowly, ecosystems regained complexity, stability, and scale. Yet despite this recovery, something fundamental had changed forever. For the first time in more than 160 million years, Earth no longer had non-avian dinosaurs. The planet that had once been defined by their presence was now without them. There were no towering herbivores shaping the vegetation, no massive predators moving across the land, no ancient lineages continuing their long dominance over terrestrial ecosystems. In the first 100,000 years after the extinction event, Earth was still recovering. But the foundations of modern ecosystems were already taking shape. Climate conditions gradually stabilized, vegetation became more widespread, and the empty ecological niches left behind by non-avian dinosaurs began to be filled. Life was not simply returning, it was reorganizing itself into entirely new patterns. About 1 million years later, mammals had begun a significant evolutionary expansion. With fewer large reptiles dominating the land, early mammalian groups diversified into new forms, exploring habitats that had once been inaccessible. Some became larger, others remained small, but together they began to define a new ecological balance across continents. "50 million years later, the transformation had become unmistakable. Vast forests, open grasslands, and wetlands were inhabited by a remarkable diversity of mammals and birds. Early relatives of elephants, horses, rhinoceroses, and large predatory mammals had spread across many regions of the world. Ecosystems increasingly resembled those of the modern Earth. "66 million years after the asteroid impact, the planet had changed beyond recognition from the world of the late Cretaceous. Humans now existed, inheriting a planet shaped in part by the absence of the giants that once ruled it. In that sense, Earth's history turned on a moment that was brief on a planetary scale, yet decisive for everything that followed. For more than 160 million years, dinosaurs represented the longest chapter in the history of land animals. Humans have existed for only a fraction of that time, a brief moment at the end of a much longer story. The journey today has come to an end. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about Earth's ancient past.